Hello, and welcome to another very exciting installment of the Lost Years of Merlin series. This is the second book called The Seven Songs of Merlin, and we are on chapter 21 called The Shriek. In the last chapter, they climbed down a cliff to try to get to the fourth song, who lived in where you have to learn it with the Slantos, the mysterious people who live in the extreme northeastern tip of Finkyra, and that involved them climbing and going over this, or going through this canyon zone. But Rhea got attacked by a wraith, and she fell, but Bumblebee caught her, and she only broke her arm. But Merlin, healed her, so he didn't know he could do that, so that's cool. He's becoming a wizard. But anyway, here's chapter 21 called The Shriek. By the time we finally pulled ourselves over the rim of the canyon, the sun had just set. Shadows gathered on the sheer buttresses, while the dark hills rising before us looked almost black. As I gazed at the hills, the lonely cry of a canyon eagle echoed somewhere nearby, reminding me of the eagle's cry that had begun the great council of Finkyra, and of the fact that those hills would have been restored to life by now had I kept my promise with the flowering harp. The three of us trekked in the deepening dusk. The flat rocks under our feet quickly turned into dry, flaky soil, the kind of soil that I had learned to identify with the dark hills. But for the occasional rustling of leaves from withered trees, we heard only the crunching of our boots, the rattling of Bumblebee's bells, and the rhythmic punching of my staff on the ground. Darkness pressed closer. I knew that whatever brave animals might have returned to these hills since the collapse of the shrouded castle must have found secure places to hide after sundown. For that was the time when the warrior goblins and shifting wraiths, and whatever other creatures lived beneath the surface, might be tempted to emerge from their caves in the rock outcroppings and crevices. I shuddered, remembering that at least one such creature had dared to appear in broad daylight. Rhea, uncannily aware of my feelings as usual, gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Night fell as we continued to ascend the dark hills. Twisted trees looked like skeletons, their branches rattling in the wind. Staying on our northeasterly course was made more difficult because of heavy clouds obscured most of the stars and the remaining moon. Even Rhea walked more slowly in the gloom. Although Bumblebee didn't complain openly, his mutterings grew increasingly fearful. My own weary legs tripped often over stones and dead roots. At this rate, we were more likely to get lost than attacked. When at last Rhea pointed out a narrow gully running down the slope, all that remained of a once surging stream, I agreed that it would be wise to rest there until dawn. Minutes later, the three of us lay on the hard soil of the ravine. Rhea found a rounded rock she could use as a pillow, while Bumblebee curled himself into a ball, declaring, "I could sleep through an erupting volcano." Given the danger, I tried my best to stay awake, but was soon slumbering along with the others. A high-pitched shriek rang out. I sat up, fully awake, as did Rhea beside me. Both of us held our breath, listening, but heard nothing beyond Bumblebee's snoring. A feeble glow behind the clouds was all that we could trace of the moon, and its light barely brushed the surrounding hills. The shriek came again. It hung in the air, a cry of sheer terror. Although Rhea tried to stop me, I grabbed my staff and stumbled out of the gully. She followed me onto the darkened slope. Searching the shadows, I stretched my second sight as far as I could, trying to detect any movement at all. Yet nothing stirred, not even a cricket. Suddenly, I spotted a hulking figure traversing the rocks below us. Even if I had not glimpsed the pointed helmet, I would have known instantly what it was. A warrior goblin. Over the goblin's muscular shoulder writhed a small, struggling creature whose life was clearly about to end. Without pausing to think, I dashed down the slope. Hearing my footsteps, the goblin whirled around. He tossed aside the prey on his shoulder and, with amazing speed, drew his broadsword. As he raised it over his head, his fiery eyes narrowed with rage. Weaponless except for my staff, I planted my feet and hurled myself straight at him. My shoulder crashed into his armored chest, throwing him backward. Together we rolled and bounced down the rock-strewn slope. I came to a stop, my head still whirling, but the warrior goblin had recovered faster. He stood over me, snarling, his three-fingered hand still grasping the sword. As the moon above us broke out of the clouds, the blade gleamed darkly. Just as he brought down the sword, I rolled to one side. It slammed into the ground, splintering an old root. The warrior goblin growled wrathfully. He raised the sword again. I tried to stand, but tripped on a gnarled stick. My staff! In desperation, I lifted it to shield my face. Even as the goblin's sword came slicing toward me, I knew the thin shaft would hardly slow the blade at all, yet I could do nothing more. As the blade struck the wood, a sudden explosion rocked the slope. A tower of blue flame soared high into the sky. The goblin's sword lifted with it, spinning like a branch borne aloft by a gale. The warrior goblin himself roared in anguish. He stumbled backward, collapsing on the hillside. He wheezed once, tried to raise himself, then fell back, as still as stone. Rhea ran to me. "Merlin, are you hurt?" "No." I rubbed the shaft, feeling the slight indentation where the sword had struck it. "Thanks to this staff, and whatever virtue Tuatha gave it." Rhea kneeled, her curls frosted with moonlight. "I think it was as much you as the staff." I shook my head, observing the motionless form of the warrior goblin. "Come now, Rhea, you know better." "I do," she declared crisply, "and I think you are denying it because you want so much for it to be true." Stunned, I gazed at her. "You read me in the same way I came to read those runes on our boss's walls." Her bell-like laughter rang out. "Some things I still can't understand, though, like why, instead of hiding when you saw the goblin, you charged straight at him." Before I could reply, a small voice spoke behind us. "You must be magical." Rhea and I spun around to see a short, round-faced boy crouching on the ground. He couldn't have been older than 5. I knew at once that he was the unfortunate creature whose shriek had awakened us. His eyes, themselves glowing like little moons, seemed full of awe. I glanced at Rhea. "That's why." Turning back to the boy, I beckoned, "Come here, I won't hurt you." Slowly he rose to his feet. Hesitantly he approached, then stopped himself. "Are you the good magical or bad magical?" Rhea stifled a laugh, wrapping her leafy arms around the boy. "He is very good magical, except when he is being very bad." As I growled playfully at her, the boy frowned in confusion. He wriggled away from Rhea and started backing down the shadowy slope. "Don't listen to her. I am an enemy of warrior goblins, just like you." Leaning on my staff, I stood. "My name is Merlin. This is Rhea, who comes from Druma Wood. Now tell us your name." The boy studied me, patting his round cheek thoughtfully. "You must be good magical, to slay the goblin with only your staff." He sucked in his breath. "I am Galway, and I've lived all my life in the same village." I cocked my head. "The only village near here is Slantos," finished the little fellow. My heart raced. Galway looked away sheepishly. "I didn't mean to stay outside the gates after dark. Really, I didn't. It's just that the squirrels were playing, and I followed them, and when I realized how late it was—" He glared at the twisted form of the fallen warrior goblin. "He wanted to hurt me." I stepped to the small boy's side. "He won't hurt you now." Eyes shining, he tilted his head up to look at me. "I think you really are good magical." Okay, well that was chapter 21. That was a pretty short one, but we will read chapter 22 tomorrow, called Ambrosia Bread. Have a wonderful night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.